microphone or just do it from here? Okay. Are you guys ready? Okay. I think we're going to get started this evening for our October 3rd joint meeting with the Planning Commission this evening for our work session. The goal of this work session is to have the town board and tonight the Planning Commission receive information on topics of town business from the town manager, town attorney, and town staff in order to exchange ideas and opinions regarding these topics. Members of the public in attendance are asked to be recognized by the mayor before participating in any discussions from the town board. And this evening, on our agenda this evening, we've got several different parts. Our first part is we're going to be looking at chapters 15, 16, and 17 in the code and have an update to our kickoff. So this evening, Scott, are you going to make introductions or, okay? Ms. Barkian is going to make introductions for Gould Evans' background and their philosophy.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the joint work session. For starters, if you have comments, I know it's a little elementary, but please raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone. It's the only way that we'll be able to record comments for tonight. First, I'd like to start out. Obviously, we've had a number of code updates over the years, more on an as-needed basis. Some of the current codes that we have now date back as far as 40, 50 years. So this is the first overhaul of the development code chapters. I'd like to introduce Chris Brewster. He's with the firm Gould Evans. And he's going to walk us through, well, first he'll be introducing his team and background on his firm, as well as the project scope, and we'll open up for a discussion towards the end.
Thank you, Carlin. And thanks. We're really excited to be here and excited about this project. As Carlin said, my name is Chris Brewster. I'm with Gould Evans. I just want to give you a quick background of our firm and the work we do and our approach to development codes and what we might bring to this project for you all. Oh, yeah, that would be great. If you
want to pass on the mic?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I'm Kelly Arnold, town manager.
Ian McCarger, town attorney.
Christy Melendez, mayor of the town of Windsor.
Kelly Unger, communications and assistant to the town manager.
I'm Steve Scheffel, one of the planning commissioners.
Gail Schick, chairman of the Planning Commission.
Patty Garcia, town clerk. Kim Emel, town prosecutor, assistant town attorney.
Victor Talon, planning commission.
Tim Annable, planning commissioner.
Brendan Boudreau, town board member, District 5.
Ken Bennett, Windsor Town Board.
Miles Baker, Windsor Town Board.
Ivan Adams, Windsor Town Board, District 6.
Mary Kate, I'm Windsor Now reporter.
Jerry Bushelman, planning commission.
Josh Olhava, senior planner for the town.
Scott Ballstead, director of planning.
And Paul Hornbeck, town of Windsor, planning.
Thanks. Again, we're glad to be here and we're excited about this project. We're a architecture and design firm based in Kansas City, but we have offices in several different locations. This is a cross-section of the types of services we do. The Planning and Urban Design Group is based out of Kansas City, Missouri, so all of the work that we'll be doing is coming out of that one office. I'll give you a little more background on our group specifically, but we have a lot of resources that we can bring to this, from people that are used to working in the development industry, as well as our planning group, which does mainly municipal planning. So we feel like we have a lot of resources we can lean on within our firm and lend to issues that are facing the town. This is the bulk of our planning group. Myself, been at Gould Evans for 16 years. I'm a planner and an attorney. Prior to coming to Gould Evans, I was a city attorney for the city of Lee Summit, Missouri. And then prior to that, I worked for Johnson County, Kansas in a public information position. The person to my left in the photo is Graham Smith. He runs our planning studio, and he's previously also came from the public sector. He was a long-range planner for the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and he's also been at Gould Evans for about 16 years. To his left is Robert Whitman. He's a landscape architect and a planner. He's been at Gould Evans for 18 years now. He also comes from a past municipal background. And then the last person that you'll see, these are the people you'll see most often. Zach Lutz is a new hire of ours. He's an urban designer. He does a lot of our graphic work and kind of brings ideas to images. So the important thing about our group is we're very cross-disciplined. Myself, I focus on development codes and regulations. Graham does a lot of the long-range planning and area planning, and Robert more of the urban design. So that's how we run, and we feel like we cover a lot of the town's planning needs and a lot of the things that were mentioned in your comp plan. This is a look at our group's core services. We do planning, we do comp plans, we do area plans, and specific plans, streetscape, things like that. We do urban design, a lot of the public realm things that we're going to talk about tonight. We have specific projects geared to that, so we are experienced with that. My core focus is on development regulations, which is what this project is mostly about. And then we also serve as on-call municipal planning staff for a lot of the cities that don't have planners in our local area. So we sit in staff's shoes, so we see it from that side as well. So we feel like we have a good understanding of some of the things that we're going to be getting into on this project. A little bit about our philosophy towards regulations. A lot of times, most of the times we're called into a project, it's because regulations have not been addressed in a long time. There's been a series of amendments over time. We're good at updating our plans, but we often don't update our regulations, and they can very easily become disjointed from your policies and goals that you've stated if you don't pay attention to them. The other thing that happens is we do amendments from time to time to address specific issues that come up, and very quickly the regulations can become cumbersome, hard to understand, hard to work with. We've seen it all, so we expect to see it all on this project as well. So our philosophy is to kind of make them more user-friendly, make them, more importantly, tied to your plan more specifically, but using these kind of techniques so that everyone understands what's expected. The biggest goal of this project is to raise everyone's expectations, both in terms of the processes they'll be encountering when they come into the development process, the standards that they'll be asked of, and also the decision-making criteria of which you all will evaluate projects on. And so that's our overall goal, and so these are some of the tools that we use to accomplish that. Development regulations, our view is that they're unlike any other set of regulations in your city. Although they have to be legal and technically enforced, they're also encountered by lots of different people on a day-to-day basis, from your average property owner, citizen, development community, to their designers and consultants. So there's a lot of different people looking at these regulations, whereas your average laws, there's not. And so that's why we kind of take this approach and try to make them better organized and user-friendly. The other part about our approach is our philosophy to public engagement on a development regulation project. It's inherently different than a planning process like the one that you just completed. We're often dealing with very specific technical language, as you all know from dealing with the development codes. So we're not always looking for input on what exactly to do in a certain section of the code. But what we are looking for is input on how to best implement your plan. We don't want to go through, you've already been through that process, so we don't want to reopen some of those policies and things you've decided, but we do want to look at specific things on what type of direction do we take on implementing the plan. Are there different approaches to things in the regulations that need to be fixed that we need to be considering? And so that's what our public process is mainly geared about. We kind of layer it so that the general public is getting more information and updates about the project, A more day-to-day layer is looking at directing the project. And then there's a core team of staff that we're dealing with the nuts and bolts of how the code comes together. So we found that's been effective, so that the bottom line of this is that when it comes time to adopt this, there really should be no surprises in the code. Everyone should be aware of what's been going on, even if it's just at a higher level. You may not know the exact language of what's in there, but you should know the general direction of it. But we will be kind of refining that as we go through the public process. I'm now going to run through the scope of the project just to give you all an idea of when you might see things and when you might be expected to meet or become more engaged. We basically set this up in 6 phases that kind of ease us into it and get us down into the details as we go through. And I'll go through each one in a little bit more detail. I know you can't read that, but I blew up some of the different phases. First one is initiation, which is where we're at now. We're in the process of finalizing a work plan with staff, and that's going to be kind of our marching order. So a lot of the scheduling items are going to come out of that, and we met today and talked about some of those details, and so we'll be refining that over the next week. And from there becomes our public engagement strategy, where we'll lay out the different types of meetings and when, and really pin them to a calendar. And then the last part is this kickoff meeting to really introduce the scope to you all, and then in a moment I want to hear from you on what issues and concerns you have about the project. The second phase, we've actually kind of already started this as well. You can see it runs concurrently with phase 1, but it's our analysis. We're really going to dive into chapters 15, 16, and 17 mainly, but some of the other standards that are impacted by those chapters we'll look at as well. And we're going to go through section by section and based on that philosophy that was up there earlier, look at how we can clean things up, improve things, streamline the process, make the regulations more clear, and then also, more importantly, tie them to some of the big ideas that are in your comprehensive plan. That second deliverable there, the critical issue summaries, that's what that's about, is taking some of the things that we see as the biggest, most difficult issues that may need to be talked about on a higher level, and doing what we call some critical issue papers that are very summary, but of the big issue, and kind of frame it. What we like to do is we break it into sections of what our plan said, what our regulations say, and what our options are. So we pick the ones where there's perhaps big conflicts, but there's a range of options for you to explore. And so we feel that's more effective use of your time, and to the extent we're dealing with stakeholders of the general public, we'll focus them on those issues through these series of papers. And so we'll begin to identify those in our analysis phase. And also here tonight, we'll hopefully hear some from you all in the discussion. Once we do that, the discussion phase is built around those papers and those issues. We'll be looking at doing a public open house, which actually today we discussed that probably moving that to the end of this phase rather than doing it at the beginning when we've had all of the papers developed, because they will be fairly user-friendly and consumable to the general layperson, and lots of imagery and kind of pointing out where there might be disjoints between your plan and regulations. And so the public open house might be best after we get through this phase, because the other thing we talked about today was on some of those topics, forming more focus group or stakeholder groups where we're doing outreach with them, either through key person interviews where we'll do them one-on-one or meeting with groups. And so that's all part of the work plan that's under discussion now. Once we get through that discussion, then we feel like we, as your consultant, are prepared to start on the draft. We now know enough about all the issues that you're facing, some of the challenges, and so we'll start to organize the code based on that. I should back up a minute. One of the things on this plan conformance report, the analysis that we do, what we're going to end with there is a table of contents, if you will, of how we think your current regulations could be reorganized if they need to be reorganized. And we feel that's actually one of the most important deliverables we have, because that's going to be the operating system of how all the different sections that you deal with communicate with each other. So that's one of the things that we want to get out of that, is how are we going to organize all the different topics that you're regulating. And then after the discussion phase, we feel like we're ready to kind of hang some meat on the bone, if you will, for that. So the first deliverable will be the initial draft, and that's based on what we hear in that discussion phase. It'll be our impression of that. We then may take certain issues may go on a different track there, and we might have to do interim drafts. You know, the first crack at it might have issues that we want to look at more specifically, and through the review and comment process, we'll learn that, and we may need to take a few different drafts of specific sections that are perhaps maybe contentious or that have a lot of different options or different directions you can go. But all of those will go through a review and comment period with the Planning Commission mainly as our main sounding board, serving as forgot to mention that too, that the Planning Commission, it will be our advisory board, and we'll be providing updates continually to the town board as well on that. After that, then we take all that input in from that initial draft and we go back to work and produce a final draft. And that's actually our first kind of professional recommendation of, from everything we've learned, here's what we think is something you should adopt or consider adopting. And we'll go through a similar review and comment period with that. And then, again, on the public engagement side, one of the things we found effective is to have, we don't want to go immediately to a public hearing, because we don't want to be receiving comments from the general public when it's pending adoption. So a public open house or workshop where we present the ideas similar to where we would in the first open house, just to let people know what's changed, what hasn't changed, and why, and we'll track it through the process on where the regulations have been updated or improved. And so it's another opportunity for them to give us feedback, the general public to give us feedback and be informed about the project, most importantly. And so from that, we may go make some tweaks to what we finally introduce as our adoption draft, but that's set for early to mid-2018 on our schedule as we track across. We'll produce an adoption draft and then introduce it into the formal public hearings and ultimately to the town board for adoption. Hopefully I have, since I'm the only one, I know it's hard to discuss, but I know there'll be some comments on the process. I don't know if we want to stop now and have those, or... Yeah.
So like Chris said, he mentioned the one-on-one stakeholder interviews. This will be somewhat similar to what we did with the comp plan. We've got stakeholders in the community development, the community developers. Probably, you know, when we get into the sign code, we'll probably have some of the local sign companies weigh in, give us their thoughts. But using some of the same community development folks that we went through with the comprehensive plan to make sure that these regulations are aligning with the goals and policies that we adopted with the plan. Is going to be an important early step in giving us direction for those papers that Chris mentioned. Also wanted to mention, as Chris said, we're looking at or proposing that the Planning Commission be the advisory or technical committee, and so that'd probably be reviewed by the Planning Commission at work sessions and invite the town board, for any town board members that want to attend the Planning Commission kind of grinding of the sausage, and then eventually when we hit key milestones and have documents to present to town board, then we would bring it to town board. But using the Planning Commission as the, I guess, technical advisory group to do the sausage grinding is the concept that we're working with, and then inviting the town board. So if there's any questions or comments on that process, let us know.
A little bit about your plan, and most of you know, but just a little refresher to get us thinking about how we might implement this. The vision is to become to distinguish yourself, the small town history that you have, but you're also a growing community in a larger region. So jobs, housing balance is very strong through the plan. How do we get more jobs in this area to balance with the housing growth that you're going to experience? Nodal development patterns, not stripping out all your major road corridors into long commercial strips and having more compact or concentrated commercial areas of all different types. Strong connected neighborhoods, amenity rich both within the neighborhoods and the community as a whole. Obviously lots of large natural features to play off in that you have advantage of, and your regional presence, the cooperation that you have with relationships that you have with neighboring communities will be part of what's guiding our work as well. Your plan's organized around these framework elements and some of the themes that came out of it that most directly impact the development code. Housing choices in more walkable neighborhoods. So not only choices of types of neighborhood, but choices of types of dwellings. How is your code supporting or not supporting that right now, and what do we need to do about it? Distinct mixed use and commercial centers. Not all of your commercial areas are of the same character, scale, intensity. So do your development regulations recognize that? Are they creating distinct places rather than just treating all red on your zoning map the same? Because it's not all the same. From downtown being dramatically different from stuff further out west on 4th Street. So we want to look at some of the, less of the land use elements, but more of the scale, form, and intensity elements, and see if we can't build some better distinctions into your commercial districts. Connected multimodal network, so the street patterns, both where they go and how they appear. The urban design features of your street will be critically important to this project. Civic spaces and natural amenities, similarly, you have lots of large-scale natural spaces to shape your community, but your plan also talks about how do we create smaller public spaces in different contexts, whether it's a very small, intimate square or plaza versus a large park, and all open space isn't equal as well, and so we want to look at different standards for different contexts there. And then strategic growth. Knowing that you've grown rapidly in the past and you will in the future, how do we be more strategic about it? So I went through each of these and I kind of presented some key questions to get us thinking on what are your most critical issues, but some of the things we saw from the land use plan, the questions seem to be that the code needs to answer how do we best integrate a variety of compatible uses into complementary development patterns. So we don't start, when we see the land use map looking like this, we don't start thinking of it as segregated things, but how do we actually integrate and create transitions among those land uses so that it's more cohesive community. So that'll be a challenge for us. On the residential developments, how do our residential districts promote open and civic space within the neighborhoods, compatible building types, and if we're going to have housing choice, are we keeping all of the districts separate? Are there some districts where we have different housing types? How do we answer that question? And then how do we create more strategic transitions between neighborhoods and housing types as well? How do our regulations support a wide variety of the places we envision in Windsor's future? So this is, again, getting at the non-residential, both your mixed-use areas and your commercial and industrial areas that are identified in the framework plan. You currently have a lot of standards that are already attempting to deal with that with your corridor standards, and that was something that interested us, that there's obviously been a lot of work done on paying attention to that, and so how can we strengthen that or improve on that? How do we design our streets to emphasize their premier role in shaping the public realm? This is a big one for us. Our planning group was, it's almost like before we ask the development community to do something different or raise the bar, we need to make sure, one, it's in the right context, and two, that the public realm that's been designed around it warrants that as well. So we run into this a lot with people trying to create more walkable places where you say, well, the building should be built to the street, and they should have these design features and all these things, and that's true, but if you haven't done a street that's a walkable street to begin with, then that doesn't make sense. So again, the idea of trying to get the right solutions in the right context will be as important or even more important with the street design standards than it will be with anything, because that sort of sets the context for different standards. Parks and recreation and open space framework of your plan. How do we integrate civic and open space into the development that shapes the town's identity? Your plan has a lot about community image being important, and so we want some of those smaller spaces and neighborhood spaces that we talked about. When we zoom out, is that all connected and forming kind of the bigger framework of your community? The trail system that that's just the strongest evident thing to an outsider coming in. How do we keep emphasizing that and making sure it's a well-connected and well-integrated? And then lastly, with the strategic growth, what are our required improvements for infrastructure and our annexation policies? Again, looking at, I believe that's chapter 15, is that right? So coordinating that with all of the work we've done on the development regulations to make sure that you're making sound investments. That's what it's all about, both on the private sector and public sector side, making sure that there's a strong tax base to maintain all the infrastructure. And so not specifically a regulation issue, but our regulations need to be coordinated with that, and we're well aware of that as well. And then lastly, this is just a list of our initial observations without having done all the analysis work. When we went through your development regulations, the first thing we noticed, and again, this is common to almost every project we've worked on, the procedures are scattered in different sections. And we thought there was an opportunity to make some real clear distinctions on the three different types of procedures. An administrative approval that's going to just be at staff level, and there will be enough information in the code to evaluate and basically check the box, if you will, on what gets approved and what doesn't. So how much of the development review can we bump down to that level and make it more of the routine things? Some of the things that are discretionary, conditional use permits, things like that might not elevate to the town board level, but that need a further review before they're approved, and being very clear that that's a different process. And then the last one, the legislative one, sometimes conditional use permits do bump up to the legislative level, but rezoning obviously, and just being very clear of what type of process someone's getting into. And then the other part of it, though, having them all consolidated into one section, so people, users of the code, if they're just concerned about at a stage of, what am I going to get into if I've got this idea, they should be able to just go to the procedure section and not have to mine through standards to find a procedure buried in a section that's trying to address substantive things. So that's one of the things in the framework that we like to organize. I mentioned a little bit the commercial districts lacked important design distinctions. So not all of your areas that are zoned commercial are going to be the same. Yet when we open your standards, it looks like they're based on land uses, and there's not a lot of things to make them different in different contexts. And so we'll start to, taking our guidance from the land use plan, start to look at that. As I mentioned, a lot of good ties to the planning policies, again, with a lot of the corridor design standards, but lacking some more specifics on physical design elements, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. The subdivision regulations are primarily engineering based, and not that they shouldn't be, but they're also an important physical planning tool and an important urban design tool, because again, that we view like the layout and platting and building of public rights of way and public realm, that shapes the character of development. And so we think there needs to be a lot more urban design standards integrated into the subdivision regulations. Overall user friendliness, the organization and simplifying, a lot of text, converting long pages of text to tables wherever we can to improve that user friendliness. And the last one, all of the housing is density based, and rather than building type based, and density doesn't tell us a lot about housing, and that's going to be a long discussion throughout this project. But there's a concept out there called the missing middle housing, and basically what it stands for is we're good at recognizing single family, duplex, and then everything else is multifamily. And we regulate that based on density, how many units on how many acres. But there's this whole host of building types that house dwelling units that are kind of lost in that shuffle, and they call that the missing middle. And our zoning regulations in every city are famous for kind of eliminating that. That's where the missing part comes from. So we want to look at that, and particularly in areas in and around downtown is where we think it would be most effective, in the downtown neighborhoods, where you might be able to put a small walk-up apartment that fits very nicely into the scale of buildings around it. And if you did the calculations on the density of that building, you'd be amazed. It would be off the charts of most of our zoning districts. Some of them could be upwards of 50 or 60 units per acre, but because it's a 6-unit building on a 5,000 square foot lot, that's where it gets out of whack in our development regulations. So that's one of the issues we've spotted. That's enough of me talking. Hopefully I've spurred some questions or thoughts or One of the things we'd like to hear is what you guys in your day-to-day working with the code and planning issues want to get out of this project, and we can start to focus in on what some of the critical issues we'll be talking about are. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not. Real quickly. One of the concepts that was in the RFP was to look at doing form-based codes. And we have some experience doing some of those, and we also have some experience integrating those into larger development code rewrites. Basically, form-based codes are a trend in the planning profession over the last probably more than 10 years now, but it's picked up more steam and gained more mainstream applications because it does a great job of converting things from just use-based to more urban design-based. So what type of place are you trying to build? So what it's kind of retaught the planning profession is that codes need to be tied towards more specific levels of plans than just blanket citywide plans. Codes need to be tied to the physical goals of that area, so context, scale, form, and the relationships and transitions that those large-scale maps that you see across the top may not necessarily do a good job of. And then lastly, the codes need to be tied to urban design principles. And that's the part that we think that the overall chapters 15, 16, and 17 can start to introduce some of those urban design principles so that if someone were to do a plan at the scale that in the lower drawing, we've basically enabled them the kit of tools to put that all together. We want your overall citywide code to start communicating with more specific plans much better. So an easy way to think of this is when someone does a PUD, they wouldn't necessarily be starting with just a blank slate of, well, go draw it up and bring back what you say and we'll approve it. You kind of give them these parts for them to assemble and then bring it back, and there's a little raising the expectations is the idea. So one of our strategies for doing that is we start integrating these different types of these framework elements into your code. So street types, open and civic space types, frontage types. So if we've paid attention to the urban design of streets, the most critical part about development is not necessarily the back portions of lots or how much is going on it, but how is that site and building actually relating to the streetscape. And then lastly, building types, starting to regulate things more on the scale of building than it is necessarily the use. So that's what form-based codes have kind of reintroduced into the planner's toolbox. And this is a way it may all come together. So down one column, you might have the different street types, and based on those street types, different frontage types would be enabled. So again, it's getting to the idea of how do we put the right solution in the right context. And just a couple quick examples of what we would do is we would base this on existing prototypes in your community or places that are envisioned in your plan that may not be in your community yet, but actually study them and look at how buildings relate to the streets and define different standards for the different frontage types. So here's an example of several different non-residential frontage types, from the less urban on the left to the more urban and walkable on the right, and a similar strategy on the residential. More suburban and car-oriented on the left, more urban and walkable on the right. So again, different solutions for different contexts. So that's just food for thought, now discussion. So anyone have any thoughts, questions?
So when we work in development world, predictability always comes up. The word predictability. How two parts of that to the developer's perspective and who we work with. How important when we get done, what level of predictability will we see in this, and be able to answer the questions that come up, or if there's good answers. And two, how important is recognizing the uniqueness of Windsor that you said we are, but we are, like you attributed, in the middle of many other communities. How important is it that we also emulate, or at least recognize that there is others around us that it's, I don't know if it's seamless to come here and do work, or is it going to be completely different than other communities? Are you going to do any work looking at how other communities in the neighborhood go through this approach and what they use?
Yeah, I'll take the first question first. Yes, we will look to other communities. A lot of that's going to be gauged on what we hear from stakeholder interviews as well. So if there's things that have worked in other communities that the development community is familiar with, we're all for exploring that and working it in. We do want to make sure we're following your plan, though, because your plan is what's most important. So when we find things that just aren't consistent with it, then we'll have to discard that. And then the uniqueness part is always difficult because I don't think the development code won't get to a level of where we make Windsor unique necessarily. I think what it will do is it will enable people to hopefully enable multiple different projects that then over time accumulate to a unique, distinct place. I mean, obviously your downtown is completely different from other areas, so we want to play on that, but what really gets to uniqueness in our opinion is multiple different projects over time following some of the same patterns and concepts that are in our code, but each individual developer putting kind of their own little fingerprint on these ideas is what we think can build some uniqueness. So Fort Collins, Loveland, the adjacent towns, they may all follow the same structure pattern and integrate well, and that's great. We would like to see that, but we would also like to see the unique projects that happen here start to have a little more flexibility. That leads to your first question on the expectations. That is our primary goal, that we need to, if we haven't raised expectations, we haven't done you guys any favors. But you're right, that the two things we hear from the development community in all of our stakeholder interviews and almost in the same sentence is, if they just tell me what they want, I would do it, but I also need flexibility. So that seems inconsistent, but we think we can do that by, one, in our procedure section, every procedure is going to have a series of 5 to 8 criteria of how does the decision-making body, whether it's staff, planning commission, or town board, what are they going to be evaluating on this project before they make their decision? So there's where we raise expectations. Some of the standards themselves may have a little bit more flexibility. One of the things we want to do is, one of the first things we'll get is, what things have been going for a variance most often? There's our first signal of something that needs to be changed. What we might do is look at that standard and go, well, what it really needs is some more flexibility in that standard. And so in the substantive standards, we might find ways to build in different criteria as well to know when a different variation of that same concept is acceptable. So all of our zoning districts and all of our substantive standards, so for example, landscape, you get to landscape standards, there should be an intent section with that section saying what you intend to do. So then when you're not specifically meeting the standard, one of the things we can do is an alternative compliance. If you're equally or better meeting that intent statement, then perhaps we allow something different to come in and you don't have to route them to a variance. So that's a way that we think we can both raise the expectations but also allow some flexibility, so it's not just all, a lot of times what municipalities do when they want flexibility is they just, well, let's make it discretionary and kick it to the planning commission or town board to make their decision, and that's not always the best.
And this is kind of general about municipal codes, but the final outcome of this product, to what extent can municipal codes be used to support or encourage development of diverse housing options? I have a second question too along the same lines. To what extent can the final product be used to encourage or prevent bottlenecks in traffic?
The first one I think I'll take because it's a little bit easier. It can do a whole lot. What we really want to do is enable a lot of different housing options. So because your plan tells us that. It says that's what the community needs. So that's where I get to the bulk of that will probably be in what are used for your multifamily development zoning districts, where a large-scale apartment complex is kind of treated the same way as a series of townhouses that you might put on a block near downtown. So that's where that missing middle idea comes in, that we need to gear regulations more towards the diverse types of housing that are out there. And they're more building type based than they are density based. And so what district they go in will be a question that we wrestle with. Do we need to create a new mixed density residential district that allows everywhere from really small, compact, single-family homes to townhomes, and then a developer can kind of arrange them however they want, and then we still have your large-scale multifamily for apartments, and where is that appropriate? So I think it can do a lot to clarify what different housing types you want to see here, and then also pinpoint the zoning districts to the right locations so that we get, that's where I got to, some of these are kind of make good transitions to different land uses, and it all kind of ties together. Rather than thinking of it in terms of projects, we think of it in terms of neighborhoods and how do we connect them. So there will be a lot to discuss on how to do that, but I think that's definitely one of the key things we saw from your plan that we need to achieve, is to encourage different housing in different situations. And the second part on bottlenecks, it will be a challenge, but the biggest thing, I actually experienced one today after our staff meetings before I got here. It was interesting seeing the community at 5:30 rather than 2:30 when we had been seeing it. But what I noticed is they're usually a result of lack of connectivity. And so I know everyone, like when you build more streets, people don't want, especially if it's in a neighborhood, people don't, well, I don't want that to be a through street because then there's lots of traffic. Well, that's not true if all the streets connect better. The filtering of the traffic is a much better strategy than loading it all onto these large-scale major arterials, where then your only strategy to keep traffic flowing is to make them bigger and wider. So that's easier said than done. Breaking that ultra suburban super grid of all the streets that carry traffic being on the section mile is a lot harder to do than it is to say. And it's going to take a lot of work with your engineering department too on what they're using for traffic analysis and things like that. But overall, better connectivity and different types of streets, using street design to tame the traffic so that it's not bad to front on a particular street that might be a major connector in your community as well. Those are different strategies that we'll look at.
You just touched on this, but do you envision new zoning districts specific to housing? And how do you reconcile that with a current landowner who may have a different expectation of their land?
That's a good question. Usually what we're doing is when we evaluate the code, that analysis stage we're going through, we're going to get a good idea of what are your most used zoning districts and what are your least used, and which ones are, maybe the standards are less aligned with what the intent of that zoning district even was, not to mention your plan. And those are the ones that we're going to want to focus on. If we focus on one of those and we look at it and we go, oh, it's widely used in the community. We've zoned, for lack of C1 everywhere, and that's the district we want to focus on. Then that's a signal that, well, what we really need to do is create a different zoning district, because the second part of your question is I don't foresee us making wholesale changes to people. This code shouldn't change the rules on people that have already zoned property. What it should do is add more options for people to do different things. Everything's going to be changing, so new standards should be coming in, but we're going to be paying attention to how much we're really changing the rules in some of the zoning districts versus not. And then if there is an area where we say we really need to change the rules, that's a signal for actually putting a new zoning district in. The other thing we'll try to do with that is look for areas where multiple zoning districts could perhaps be consolidated, because they might be doing the same thing, because the last thing we want to leave you with is more districts to deal with. We want to be simplifying this code. So that's a good question, not an easy answer, but we're going to be paying attention to that throughout the project.
So the Planning Commission is going to act as the technical committee, and I agree. That's correct?
Actually, advisory is how we've been
Okay, because in our packet, you had an advisory committee and then a technical. Are you still going to have the advisory committee made up of stakeholders? And if you are, then how are you going to, or who is going to, find those or bring them into a committee?
I may have interchanged those terms, and if I confuse things, sorry about that. But yeah, the advisory committee is the planning commission. The I guess, broader brush topics, and the technical committee is more at the staff level, getting into the nuts and bolts of the regulations. And then the stakeholders, I guess the way we discussed it this afternoon, I think going back to the same stakeholders that we talked to during the comprehensive plan process and having those one-on-one interviews would be beneficial at the outset, but then maybe bringing them together also as a group with staff and have everybody in the room as we get into the, I guess, refinement of the regulations might be something that we look at as well.
Okay.
Chris, did you want to talk to that question? The one she just asked?
No, that's...
Okay. Well, Chris, this is a question that I'm not sure how long you've been involved, and maybe that would be my first question. And my second part of that is, having looked at our 3 chapters, how far off base are we? Can you relate to that?
How long with the town, you mean? I'm the novice in the room with the town. You all know far more than me, so that's why I'm here to listen. So we've studied your plan, and we've worked under plans similar to that, so we are familiar with the issues you're facing. And we've gone through a little bit of what we think's wrong with your code. That was that slide I had up on just our few observations. We've just now begun to go page by page through it. So how far off base you are, I don't have an assessment yet. But by end of October, beginning of November, we will. Our next deliverable on this will be that plan conformance report, where we're going to have section by section rating different sections of the development code against what some of the key themes of the plan are, and are they strongly supporting, strongly undermining, and everything in between.
So that will be part of your initial phase, is doing this study and looking at the present plan.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, the town's code still contains a lot of the language that was originally adopted back in the late 60s, early 70s. And since that time, when it was originally adopted, we've made numerous changes, kind of piecemeal, as things arose. And so it's become, I guess, a little bit unwieldy, and it's not as user-friendly as it should be. And as Chris pointed out, some of the things that are in sections that should be in other sections and are hard to find and are maybe text-heavy, those are some of the things that we really want to try to address by going with more tables and illustrations and getting rid of some of the extra wordiness that we've got in there that's built up over the last 40 years. So.
Scott, I agree with that. You've heard me say over and over that needs to be done, so thank you.
So I guess, yeah, I should have probably prefaced. So we adopted the comprehensive plan in April. And so the logical next step is this process. And we budgeted 2 years to complete the process. I think Chris's timeline's a little bit more condensed than that, but it would spill over into the first quarter of 2018. Yes. Yeah.
I think it'd be good to have it work product of this board by the election.
Yeah. Unless there are any other questions for staff or for Chris? I know we've kind of staff has compiled a list of some of the topics that come up at times at Planning Commission and Town Board, and so we're letting Chris know that we want to make sure that those are priorities that the board and the Planning Commission want to discuss, and so if you have any others of those on your mind, feel free to let us know. All right.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Okay, so we'll move on to our second item on this evening's agenda. Mr. Alhalba, are you going to be leading that discussion item?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's the Village East developer proposal to amend the Windsor Severance intergovernmental agreement.
Just gonna use this, I think. As long as this works here, can everyone kind of hear me? I'll speak up and hopefully this picks me up. So thank you, Madam Mayor, Town Board, and thank you, Chairman Schick and Planning Commissioners, for if you're sticking around or listening in. Since there's a lot of content within your packet, I'm going to jump into just the analysis summary in my staff memo, and also kind of the action steps for the town board to take to give direction to staff. So that way we can get into more of the discussion. That way the town board can discuss this IGA amendment proposal in more detail. So here is the subject property on the screen before you. This is the Eastbrook second and third annexation properties. They are directly southeast of the Village East subdivision that was recently platted and built out. Just southeast of the Great Western Trail corridor, north of Highway 392 and west of County Road 21. So that's the property we're talking about here. So jumping down into this analysis summary, and you feel free to ask any questions about the specific analysis details further up in staff's memo. The site development issues, such as access, circulation, floodplain, and utilities, remain the same, whether the property develops commercially or residentially. For the vast majority, it just kind of the details on how those are worked out is what it really gets down to. A traffic study will be needed, traffic study will need to be completed as part of the development review process to assess all potential problems and provide recommendations to alleviate traffic concerns. That's consistent with pretty much any new development, again, commercial or residential that comes to the town. The Clomer and Lomer FEMA processes are required with any development, again, commercially or residentially, that are located in the designated floodplain area. And lastly, sewer capacity does not appear to be a factor for this property if it goes between commercial or residential. There's enough sewer capacity to accommodate the applicant's concept, and any deviations from that, there's plenty of capacity. Based on staff's analysis, amending the IGA boundaries to allow residential uses within the subject property appear to be most critical to the fiscal impacts and the long-term maintenance of town-owned infrastructure. And again, town-owned infrastructure, public improvements, those are the streets, sidewalks, water, sewer mains, drainage facilities that aren't under a metro district or within a development HOA. Using the economic fiscal analysis model, it was determined that a change to residential would produce a net fiscal cost of $316,399 over a 10-year period. Additionally, the cost would be exacerbated by the property tax sharing provisions of the IGA, as the town would be required to share the residential property taxes while continuing to provide services and maintain public infrastructure. So part of the IGA document, outside of just getting into land uses or development specific requirements, there's also a tax sharing component that goes along with that between the town of Windsor and the town of Severance. The comprehensive plan based the land use plan and the framework plans on the existing IGA and the existing zoning on the property. That is why it's identified as more of the commercial industrial within the IGA. The property is industrial zoned, and then the land use plan also depicts that. In addition, the comprehensive plan specifically identified 2 intersections along the State Highway 392 corridor east as either a catalyst opportunity or gateway. And these are the State Highway 392 and State Highway 257 intersection. So that is right by the cemetery, so about 3/4 of a mile, I believe, west of the property, or a mile west of the property. And then the other is State Highway 392 and Weld County Road 23, or what turns into Great Western Drive. And that intersection is approximately 3/4 of a mile east of the Weld County Road 21, 392 intersection where this property is located. The IGA was developed based on the commercial industrial strip development concept, which was a popular development style along major corridors in the mid to late 20th century. Throughout the comprehensive plan, there are references to commercial nodes and nodal development as being the preferred development style. The development style promotes walkable neighborhoods and better multimodal circulation and access. Scrolling down here, if an IGA boundary adjustment allowance of residential uses is approved, the property owner will need to address access and circulation through the development review process, as well as providing adequate buffers between any residential lots and the heavy industrial Pioneer Sand site and State Highway 392, which are directly south of the property. So those would be things that staff would work out through the development review process. A quick summary: on August 3rd, staff from Windsor and Severance met to discuss the concept proposal. Severance staff did not express any major concerns and said that Severance would await Windsor's direction before reviewing and commenting on the IGA request. It is also important to note that amendment of the IGA will require official action by both the town board, so the Town of Windsor Town Board, and the Severance Board of Trustees. One quick item before I jump into the action. So the applicant's response to staff's memo, the fiscal analysis was also included in your packet, and staff just wanted to clarify a couple items just to make sure that they're brought to the forefront. Staff does not question the validity of the economic study that was quoted within that, but Windsor is a very unique community, both from a social standpoint as well as an economic standpoint. So we may not fit the typical community profile that study could be based on. Some items include sales tax revenue on building permits, or building materials, excuse me. That's only beneficial to Windsor if materials are purchased in Windsor. We don't really have a hardware lumber supply yard here in Windsor. So most of the materials are not purchased here in Windsor. The state employee benefits only last for the duration of the home construction or any construction phase. And kind of looking at some of the existing subdivisions, they're almost built out in 1 year. So those employee numbers are really for that 1 year time frame. And in Windsor, our construction workforce is a little less than 10% of our overall workforce numbers for the town. The payment of impact fees at the issuance of building permit is a valid benefit to the town, however, is also a one-time revenue source. So it just comes in with the building permit, doesn't continue later on, with the exception of redevelopment or any other construction-related activities. From a long-term property tax perspective, commercial property taxes are assessed at a rate of 29%, and residential are at a 8.24%. As stated a little bit ago, all the engineering concerns are the same. regardless of residential or commercial. It's just how they're addressed and some of those specific details, but the general concerns are still the same. Residential uses could be constructed immediately, whereas commercial or industrial uses may take much longer to realize. Staff agrees with the applicant on that it could be many, many years before commercial industrial develops at this location, just based on its location along that corridor and some of the other strategic intersections or locations. But development, again, for the development's sake, should not be a determining factor. The question is which use is the highest and best use of the property moving forward, because once it's developed, it'll stay developed for quite some time. Jumping into the action section of the staff memo. As previously stated, the intent of this work session is for staff to receive direction from the town board regarding the request to amend the boundaries of the IGA to allow residential uses. This analysis was prepared at the request of the town board. This discussion tonight should focus on the analysis and direction from the town board. And if the direction is to proceed, the details of the proposal would be discussed with the town of Severance and at future public hearings before the board and the Severance Town Council. Based on the enclosed materials, the town board may choose to decline to consider the requested amendments to the IGA. That will result in the discussion ending on this request. Or the town board may direct the town attorney to prepare a draft IGA amendment to present to the town of Severance for consideration. If this is the direction of the town board, the applicant will have the opportunity to present their concept details in more detail during those hearings and get into more of the kind of minutia of those concept plans. And lastly, if the town board directs the town attorney to move forward, the town board may also direct staff to prepare draft language to amend the shared revenues section of the IGA, since right now we are required to share 1/3 of those revenues with the town of Severance, and with residential development, there's going to be a lot more of an impact to the town of Windsor, so that may be something the town board wants to look into. So with that, I would turn it back over to you, Madam Mayor, and any questions that you and the board have or your discussion.
Are there any questions?
And I would like to note that the applicant and a couple of its representatives are present in case you have some specific questions to them as well.
Can you bring up the colored slide that was in the packet?
Is this the map you're looking at?
Yes.
Yeah, and on this map, you'd see a couple notes that staff looked back at where those boundary lines were for the 8th mile. So we adjusted a couple numbers based on that location.
So is the 8th mile the red line or that dotted purple?
Yeah, so the 8th mile is actually approximately where this red line is located. If I can get the cursor here, I don't know where's that, kind of disappears. Yeah, it's the red line is the 8th mile. The purple line is what the applicant had in their packet, and staff went back and looked at that and found that it's more in line here at this red line based on our GIS using some measurements, and then that just adjusts the commercial corridor area, buildable area. So that's why you see those numbers a little different. We just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Oh, go ahead. Did you need the microphone?
Thanks, Scott.
All right, along with that, I think the other figure is a 1/4 mile. And where is that on this map?
The 1/4 mile, that yellow dashed line is right.
The yellow
approximately.
dash, will you point that
Yes.
out? I must be colorblind.
So, yeah, it's kind of gold on here. Let me get to hand. That might be a little bit better. So it's
Right there is, that's the 1/4 mile, and the 8th mile is the red line.
The 8th mile is what staff had looked at. It should be the red
Okay,
line.
can you lower that? And the purple, what is the purple? I'm going to say purple, might be blue, but
So the purple was what the applicant had put on their concept as the 8th mile, but when staff looked back at it, it should be up where the red line is.
Okay, that's what you were saying.
Yeah, so
All right, thank you.
The area in purple is within what's considered the commercial corridor part of the IGA. And so it's more specific to commercial uses, where the area between the 8th and the quarter mile, that's where the IGA gets into more restriction on the limited industrial type uses, where you can have a little bit more of that outdoor storage as an accessory or more industrial type activity, similar to what we see on the Falcon Point subdivision south of 392 that Chris Ruff had worked on. That one's kind of below that quarter mile, so that's why you see more of that industrial development occurring right there along the railroad tracks.
Okay, I have a couple other questions, but I don't want to, I think, Chris, you had some other questions. Okay, my other question, as we look at this and the right in and the right out coming on this road, I understand that the library, which is just west of that, also has the same problem. And are we going to have a traffic jam when we look at that down the road? And I'm concerned about that. And I mean, I guess we have to look at that as we plan. But and I talked with David a little bit earlier, and he said he had some answers for that. But that was the other question that I have. And then probably the second question that I would have, the floodplain, can we talk about that a little bit tonight? Because I know there's a floodplain area out there and a concern from the homeowners when I was the representative for that district. Okay.
Yeah, so your first question about the right in, right out. So the library site is over here west of the 257 Hollister Lake Road intersection. I think this, they've talked about these sites, and here's a right in, right out. But without having a development plan in place, there's no details on that. What staff has requested, and that's the circulation access point part of the analysis, and the applicant who responded on some of those, is that a right in, right out at this location into the development. So if I go back to here, staff was proposing a right in, right out, trying to encourage that for better connectivity into and around the site. Where right now the development would go back into the Village subdivision and go all the way over to Hollister Lake Road. So on the aerial, that would send people up Dakota Way and all the way across through the PPU neighborhood, or the other access points directly on the Weld County Road 21, and that's a full movement. So the only right in, right out was what staff was trying to encourage the applicant to do at this location, just west of where the John Law Ditch intersects with Highway 392.
Will you point out the one that I was talking about, the library?
I believe what
read that was
believe what you're looking at.
right out to.
This location is slated as a right in, right out from the subdivision plans and from. Is it could be a 3/4, but it's not a full movement intersection because of its location next to 257 and also the safety along 392 for people pulling out.
Yeah, and I guess we want to make sure that the floodplain and access things are addressed during the subdivision process, but the question tonight is really, instead of the details, we want to concentrate on whether or not this is a request that the town board wants to entertain. And if so, then those details will obviously need to be worked through the subdivision process and with the town of Severance as well.
The packet made mention of multifamily and single-family. Is that still the consideration? And if so, do we know where? Is the multifamily more likely to end up along the 392, or do we know at this point?
It's placed on this eastern side here where it says approximately 5.6 acres. That's an area that the applicant is proposing to reserve for multifamily. The details of what that multifamily is, I think the applicant's still working out those fine details. They might have a little bit more on that, but for right now, that's the area slated for multifamily just off Weld County Road 21.
Okay. Are there any additional questions from town board or planning commission, since we have planning commission?
So, Josh, assuming this is the concept, I just want to clarify. Everything north of the red line and south of the gold line is able to be developed residential or multifamily? No.
No, it is restricted to the more limited industrial
Okay,
or commercial.
so that entire area south of the gold
Yes,
is
sir.
limited? Okay.
That does not allow residential
Thank you.
below that section, so. And to kind of go along with that, with the Village East subdivision, you'll see a few lots dip below that, but that property is really constrained based on the Great Western Trail. So if you kind of see those couple lots there, there were some really unique constraints there as to why those were not factored in there, so.
And is this current, well, of course, the current plan is going to be flexible depending on our conversation that we have with Severance, I would guess.
Can you re-ask the question?
Well, I guess what I guess what I'm saying is, I would be amenable to having us visit this conversation with Severance. However, I really am feeling we need to protect that 1/8 mile commercial corridor. And so, I mean, that would be the discussion I would want to have, is what can we do? We can have residential, but I would like to preserve the 8th commercial corridor, which I believe is in our IGA with Severance, correct?
Yeah, and we wouldn't be eliminating that throughout the whole corridor. It would be specific to this kind of development
Right,
proposal boundaries.
but I think we need to protect that commercial corridor within our boundaries. That is going to be our eastern entryway into our community.
So you're willing to consider
Um,
at least talk to Severance between the red and gold?
Yes,
Not the red below.
that would be my conversation. So I would look to fellow board member, but that's the conversation I would entertain. And I'll pass this over there maybe.
Well, my concern as I've looked at this is, you know, as we look at this, possibly when we move east of the downtown, the DDA area, and we're going to be looking at possible commercial areas out in that area. I know Chris Ruff is talking about some on the south side of that 392. And so I would agree with our mayor that I think we need to protect that 1/8 mile as I've looked at this and thinking about what's going to happen in the future. Because I think that we're going to grow east, we're going to grow west, and we'll probably grow south as we, you know, get this population. That's my concern, and I want to leave some area for commercial, and I didn't read a lot about commercial. In fact, it was almost left out of the discussion as I read it. And I understand the multi-family, and I understand the single family, but those were my concerns.
My preference is to keep, to not amend the IGA for two reasons. One is we have a comprehensive plan that we just spent a lot of money to get done. And also our retail study advised that this will be an important retail and commercial corridor. So that's, my preference is to keep it as is.
That's also my preference for the same reasons, the comp plan. There was a good reason why it was zoned, and land plan talked about commercial, and also the potential development we have on the east side of town. This is an exciting opportunity for some commercial development there. So I'm not excited about or supportive of altering the IGA. Got me thinking a little bit about the area north of the red line, if that could be business offices or something that would complement our economic development. I might be open to that, but right now I would say no.
Question for you, Josh. The space below the red line there that is within the commercial corridor, that 8th mile, how much is part of the development? What is the makeup of that?
Yeah, so that's the number staff recalculated here to what's buildable, approximately 9.6 acres, and that takes out an area for detention and the John Law ditch down there.
Okay.
So, yeah, below the red line, kind of looked at really what the developer had outlined for their concept, and it came up about 9.6 acres, 9.5 acres.
What percentage would you say that is of the entire commercial corridor?
You mean along the whole 392?
On that eastern side?
So this would be a buildable area for not the approximately 9.5 acres. You have the Pioneer Sand Site to the south. That's industrial but commercial property. And then you have the 4 estate homes here that have been in the county for quite some time.
Yeah.
So you could factor in some of those. It would be hard without looking into some of the water issues and floodplain issues and where drainage has to go. So I don't have a number.
Sure.
Unfortunately.
No, that's okay. I was curious. I'm open to renegotiation, looking at this. I think that, you know, one of the things that we talk about often is housing issues. We have a lot of people looking for housing in Windsor. It's a very attractive area, and I think that the area that we're talking about here, in which it goes into the commercial area, I mean, it would bring some diversity to the area there instead of just one big commercial corridor. I'm of the mind that having diversity and having flexibility is a good thing. So that's where I stand.
Yeah, just to touch on Brendan's point, there's not a lot of diversity shown on that map. It looks like a lot of single-family homes, which we have a lot of. So I would be interested in much more diverse housing over there.
Josh, am I correct that that was approximately 28.6 acres north of the red line? And then the 9.6? I didn't think it was quite that much, the 9.6, but if I read that correctly.
I believe it comes to, so the total area of buildable area within the gold line down is about 29, so you subtract the commercial area, so about 20 in between the red and gold.
So you subtract that 9.6 from that.
Depends on which area you're talking about.
Well, I tried to read it and I wasn't sure,
Yeah.
but I was thinking north of that area, but I also wasn't thinking about the purple area there.
Yes, so the area below the gold line for this concept, that whole area is approximately 29 acres, 29.5 acres of buildable areas. So area that the applicant and their team has done the calculations on, drainage, things like that. That's what they come up with for buildable area, subtracting the John Law and some other flood plain mitigation. And then if you subtract out the commercial section below the red line, you're left with about 20 acres between the red line and the gold line. That would be
Okay, thank you.
the other-
I didn't quite understand, but I think I read 28.6, but those figures would
Yeah.
be within reach, so.
Comment and a question.
Yes, sir.
Our economic development department, we have a number of prospects who look at Windsor. And when we lose them, one of the issues is that we don't have available space for them to locate their business. They're not looking for brownfield, they're looking for brownfield, they're looking for existing space to lease, which could be in this corridor, as I understand.
Yes,
So-
again, below the red line, that's commercial specific, gold line down, that gold line to red line, that would allow the lighter industrial warehousing, office warehouse.
Which could
spec
help our
buildings.
economic development department. Okay, my question is, if we open this up to negotiation, even the area between the red line and the gold line, that could become single-family housing. We don't have the authority, do we, to say we want office buildings or multifamily in there?
I think as part of the IGA amendment, if you propose to move forward as a board, you could probably specify how much you're willing to allow for residential, but
Yeah, I think that's something that could definitely be discussed with the town of Windsor and, or with the town of Severance as well as the applicant. I think the property owner can definitely outline all the site constraints that lend themselves to one land use over another. But I think if the town board wants to put conditions or see something specific in their amendment to the IGA, they could work with the property owner and the town of Severance as well.
I appreciate the thoughts about trying to look at flexibility on something, but I also am thinking about the tremendous need we have for commercial space and the opportunities that are coming up, I think, on the east side there. And so I think I'm still opposed to opening up negotiation on that from my point.
Mr. Baker and Mr. Bennett, would you explain the no? What do you mean by the no? You're saying no to the negotiations?
I'm saying no to negotiation. Keep the IGA as. Leave it as it is. Leave it as it's present.
Leave it as it is.
Good reason, vision for commercial space there in the comp plan, potential growth. I think those outweigh.
Well, I'm going to say that I think that it's still open, that we could talk with Severance. I think we owe them that opportunity. And I look at the growth of this community, and it's a beautiful area as long as we keep the commercial area. That's my feeling.
If council does decide to consider the subdivision area up there, why are you including the multifamily? I know the subdivision, I think the argument for it, there's a lot of floodplain, and it's not really good for commercial development. But the 5.6, whatever acres out there, has frontage, still seems very good for commercial development. Why are we taking all that and trying to go residential?
it's just based on the applicant's request, so getting into details, that was the request, was to amend all the boundaries to allow for residential throughout that.
Some of it
parcel.
compromised, do some of it, but still keep that frontage area for commercial. As originally intended.
The one thing that nobody's brought up is the cost-benefit difference, which is huge going from residential to commercial. The way it's set now, we would have a benefit of almost $3 million over the 10-year period, and if it changes, it's going to be a cost to the town. So how do you close that gap? That's a big, big gap.
Yeah, and maybe this would be a time to maybe hear something from the applicant, but from what I heard or read in our packet, Chairman Schick, is if we leave this all as commercial, that commercial corridor is going to take a very, very long time to develop, and the cost is going to be, they can't get the square footage of the retail in there to accommodate. So, I mean, we're looking at, perhaps decades before something's going to happen. So I'd like to echo Mr. Boudreau's comments. I think we need housing as well. We know we need, more diversified housing. I think this might be that opportunity, and I think there might be room in here for some kind of option, for some kind of compromise to take a look. I don't want to compromise or encroach on the commercial corridor that we have established, but I think there might be some other opportunities that we certainly could have discussion on with Severance moving forward. So perhaps moving forward, the recommendation might be to have a joint session with Severance and have this discussion. But I also think the applicant wanted to maybe add a couple of things to our conversation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is David Cheddar, and I appreciate you all taking the time to look at this for us and having an open mind on this. As far as the multifamily, is it Mr. Baker? Okay, and you are
Mr. Bushelman.
Bushelman, as far as the 5.6 acre piece, we're not, and Josh is aware of this, we're not locked into that being multifamily by any stretch. I've always looked at it quite honestly as something that could be very open. We've looked at things like assisted living, which is a great commercial venture at that kind of a location or something like that because of the access points. What really drove us in this direction, quite honestly, is the constraints of the property dealing with the mitigation of 4,400 CFS coming through this particular point, which is, as you're aware, through my response, more water than the Poudre River at flood stage. And so it's really compromised what could be done at this particular point. The feasibility of any development project is only, we typically ask ourselves, what is the highest and best use of the property today, going forward? Because the commercial aspect of this particular property with the constraints associated with it, quite honestly, could be years from now. And the benefit, the tax benefits, the tax revenues that you generate from that are only as good to the town if that project actually exists. So you're not going to see any benefit if the project itself doesn't exist. As far as tax revenues or to give you an idea of what the residential can do for you, as you're aware, the north side of this particular project, the Village East project, over the course of the last year, in talking to Journey Homes today, they indicated to me that they have paid the town of Windsor in permit fees alone this year, just short of 5.1 million coming in, and as far as revenues. These are revenues that you can have today because we can get this project done today. Okay, the commercial, we're not sure, and once again, there's some constraints associated with that. We're not opposed to looking at everything below the red line potentially being commercial. When we originally came with our initial concept, we had a commercial play all through there, but it was the constraints of the water and the traffic flow and quite frankly, any access off of 392 and the economics associated with that that really has driven us to the point we're at today. And I've got our water engineers, and our engineers are here, and they can speak towards the actual feasibility of that at this particular point.
Okay, Mr. Baker?
Thank you. To a layman like me, how can you explain the cost differential for the water mitigation between residential and commercial? Why would it be, is it less expensive for residential, or it's just a quicker recovery because of residential?
It really boils down. I got a big voice. I mean, I can go with it. It really boiled down to access, quite frankly. We looked at, as you can see, the 4 existing homes on the corner of 392 and 21. We were charged with, through the mitigation of the water, and our water engineer can speak to this a lot better than I can, but those are not annexed into the town of Windsor, those 4 pieces of property. So consequently, they're in Weld County, so a referring agency associated with this project would be Weld County. In Weld County, when you're mitigating the water, we have to have a zero rise effect associated with the mitigation of that water. And so consequently, as it comes around those 4 properties, and you see all the green down by 392, 392 acts as its own little reservoir with the John Law project there and everything else. 392 becomes its own natural barrier. So consequently, the cost, where the cost comes in is the access to 392. That cost to get any kind of entrance off of 392 would be basically, we'd need what, Aaron, 22 box culverts?
We evaluated two scenarios. We evaluated a scenario where all the water would go under the road and there'd be no water overtopping. That was 22 culverts. We evaluated an alternative scenario where you'd have 6 inches of water overtopping in this catastrophic flood event, which is acceptable in many places. And that was a 17 box culvert scenario. And I believe we came up with a rough cost estimate of 1.2 million for that crossing. So that's what it's coming down to, is a project of this size supporting the cost of such a tremendous crossing cost. It's just a bit infeasible.
So getting back to your direct question, because I asked the same question. Okay, so getting back to the exact same question, with residential, we can move the traffic flows in a different pattern, and we don't have to worry about a access off of 392 as far as being a, what would we call that, off of 392?
It'd be a right-in, right-out?
Well, but you don't have, for somebody to be excited about having a commercial retail shop there, okay, they're not gonna, we're not gonna wander them through a neighborhood to get them there, okay? So it really came down to, do we have access off of 392? And we came to the determination of a project of this size, we can't support the economics to build an entrance off of 392, and it's all relegated back to having to mitigate the water that at this particular location. It's that simple.
So the cost to mitigate water is the same regardless of commercial or residential?
Correct, but
I'm Craig Karn. I'm with Consilium Design. We're the planners on the project. The challenge with commercial is you have to have the access to get in there, and we also don't have a great deal of frontage. Like David said, that the 4 lots to the east are not even in Windsor, and we don't control the properties that actually have the frontage. And convincing any commercial endeavor to come into a property where you have a $1.2 million cost to access, well, the land south of the red line, 10 acres. It's cost prohibitive. So we looked at, well, it didn't seem like that much area to create just a stronger residential design. It's a city block back off. It will be a city block off of the road to create that residential area if we moved it back to that red line. And it felt like it was a balancing act. So again, originally we looked at this, we were trying to find a way to make it predominantly commercial, and then we ran into this issue of access.
So the cost is the same regardless of the type of development? For water mitigation, I'm talking about.
Well, the cost is the same provided I build an entrance off of 392. If I don't have to build an entrance off of 392, no, the cost isn't the same.
Okay, so if we talk about commercial below the red line, we will likely want access off 392. So then again, we're probably back in the same place.
If I could speak to one more point, Josh, I don't recall, do you have the context graphic that we did where we showed some alternatives for how we could tie all the streets together? Was that included in the packet? Here we go. We looked at, as you can see, it's a little bit modified sketch plan on here from the previous exhibit we had done earlier, but we think there are opportunities. The access control plan for the Highway 392 shows a fully signalized intersection that we think ultimately could help serve all the area. And it moves it to the west where I think, and Aaron, you could speak to it better than myself, but it's probably half as much of a water issue. The further we go west, the less water we have to put under the road. So we studied this and think that there's a traffic pattern that we can work out to get us access. Even if some of that frontage area was developed as commercial, probably best to try to bring cars to that planned signalized intersection rather than building a $1.2 million right-in, right-out part of a city block to the east. So we think there's ways to resolve it, especially with a residential plan where we can make local street connections and probably come up with better access for the commercial.
And it would also give you, they do a your question is, if we want to keep that lower section commercial, then if we use the signalized, based on the access plan of 392, we use that signalized area to bring people in from the going north and then east. Then we're not having to mitigate the water. It makes it cost effective, and we can make commercial much more viable, especially if it's 10 acres.
Are there any additional questions? Otherwise, if I hear the consensus from the board, I hear Mr. Boudreau and Adams and I are in favor of moving this to the next stage, and I'm hearing Bennett and Baker who are opposed. Is that correct?
I'd be willing to look at a plan. I'd be willing to look at a plan.
I think we have one more question that we have to talk about, but I want to go back to the comment that, and I don't know, remember the names, no, the gentleman next to you. Yeah, but I think you said 1/8 of a mile isn't very wide. If I did some math here real quick, I think that's 220 yards. That's far more than 1/8 of. Yeah, but that's more than what we have behind our DDA buildings on the main 392, and there's a lot of room back there for some buildings. And I don't know. I'm not an engineer, and I'm definitely not a developer. Am I, Mike? But anyway, I'm concerned about it. But the other question I think we have to answer tonight, if I read that.
No, there's no other question to answer, except if we're just moving forward with severance. That's the only question we're answering tonight.
You sure?
Yes.
There is the shared revenue section if the board.
I think that would be up for discussion at that time.
Okay.
That's part of our discussion. Yep, yep. So I am, I mean, I think you have your direction that the board wants to move forward and at least have this discussion.
So what I'm hearing is, I think the next step would be an invitation to Severance to come to some session to discuss this further with Ian. I heard the town attorney would develop kind of a proposal for the IGA as a basis of discussion, but it would be a joint meeting between the two bodies. And I would say that it should be a joint meeting between both bodies with both planning commissions if both bodies want those to come also. Recognizing that we just did this with our neighbors to the west, I want to make sure that it's clear that these, do take time, unfortunately. So I know the applicant or the party of owns the land is interested in getting an answer soon. I've heard a lot of different varieties of interests tonight already. So just even to get the group together is going to take a little time. And then after that, who knows what happens. So I just want to make it clear that this is probably not a month-long process. This is a process of some sort. So we'll work on, I will make the call to the town manager tomorrow and say we'd like to invite you. We'll start scheduling, putting a schedule out there to get both groups together. In the meantime, Ian will start working on what would look to be an amendment to the IGA as a starting point. And then that would be kind of the layout for a joint meeting, which I would assume that you would want to hear from the interested landowner, making a case for an IGA amendment, comments from planning staff and such, almost a hearing to some extent so that both bodies can get all the information you want. Both bodies can talk together like we did that one time in Fort Collins, and what you want with each other if you're interested in proceeding and what those elements look like. So is that kind of generally what you're thinking it looks and feels like? next up? Okay, so we'll
So-
get that going.
So would we have a draft IGA amendment at the meeting, or that would be discussed before?
I think Mr. Town Attorney could probably have something in front of everybody to have a basis of discussion.
And should we include that revenue sharing?
We'll put it in as a question.
Okay.
And or is it for the entire area, or are we still at the 1/8 commercial? Or is that something to work out at that?
I heard the town board supported keeping the commercial
Okay.
intact, and that everything north above the commercial is under consideration for amendment. Is that correct, town board, for discussion purposes?
I think Mr.
Okay.
Cheddar's wanted to ask a question, possibly.
Just would it be beneficial with us coming up with a, conceptual plan at that point, keeping the commercial intact the way you're looking at it, and basically give you a concept based on that kind of a recommendation?
I think it's your choice.
I mean, I think it helps. I mean, it doesn't hurt. All right, we'll get that piece together for y'all.
Mr. Boudreau, did you have something before we go into the next item?
I guess the question that I have is pretty loud. This is for the people. It's for the people. They can probably hear me from here. My brother said that I could scream through concrete walls. So something I would be curious about is that from some of the points that were being made, one of the reasons why they were not considering the development of commercial in that area is because of the economic feasibility of it. What I would be curious to know is that if we're going to stay married to the idea of keeping that corridor pure, is it actually economically feasible? Do we just have this dream that we can keep this corridor pure? In reality, it's a pipe dream for us too, for the reasons that were brought up. So I think that's something that we really need to consider here is that, well, we can say we want commercial, that entire area to be a commercial corridor, but in reality, if it's not economically feasible, it's just going to be sitting there as an empty lot. So I would say I don't want to necessarily take that portion of the corridor completely off the table as part of the development option. And I may be a minority in that, but.
Let's start there, but again, I think, for what it's worth, I think everything's open for discussion. And we'll start with something, and we'll see where the discussion goes. All right? Okay, thanks.
Okay. Moving on to our third item is the Weld County Coordinated Planning Agreement Design Standards Update. Who's delivering that? Mr. Balstead?
And I'll just give a really brief update, and that's based on the July meeting with the county commissioners. You'll recall that the two boards asked staff to bring back the standards that were discussed at the end of last year, early this year. And I've since spoken with the Weld County Planning Director. We've floated the idea of having 2 elected officials from each jurisdiction serve on a working committee to look at those standards again. And so Mayor Melendez and Town Board Liaison to the Planning Commission, Bennett, have volunteered to represent the town. And today, Mr. Parco confirmed that Commissioner Freeman has confirmed, as well as Commissioner Kozad. So we'll be working on date and time, looking at your schedules to try and get the 4 elected officials together. So that once the standards have been vetted, then we would bring those back for Planning Commission recommendation to Town Board. So, any questions about that?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Balstead. And then our final item this evening is road impact fee update in accordance with section 17-15-100 of the municipal code. Mr. Balstead?
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. This item is more or less an introduction to road impact fees. We haven't had this discussion in a while. But the code does require two different types of updates to the road impact fee ordinance. The first one is a comprehensive review that takes place every 5 years, and we typically have a consulting team prepare that comprehensive update, and so we'll be discussing that more next weekend at the budget retreat, as staff has included that consulting line item in the proposed 2017 budget. The other type of update that the code requires is an annual review of the road impact fee table based on Colorado construction impact or Colorado construction index costs to make adjustments for inflation. The last adjustment that the town made was actually back in 2010, and at that time we were coming out of the recession. The update got tabled for other discussions, and there have been several other road impact fee related topics that the town board has had over those several years. And so staff is bringing this back as an update that should take place annually. And this one, I'm waiting for the third quarter CCCI numbers to come from CDOT so that we can prepare what that inflation adjustment looks like. But I just wanted to get this before you to introduce the topic that the code does require these two types of updates. One we're proposing to address through the budget, and the other will probably be back before you on an agenda for action later this year after we have those third quarter numbers to calculate what the change would be. So, any questions about the road impact fee ordinance or anything along those lines? All right. That's all I had.
So you have plenty of things going on. Town board does. I think the planning commission also does, but the town board specifically, don't forget 7:30 tomorrow morning, third floor conference room. We'll have a special meeting, go into executive session. It's been posted, and we'll have donuts and coffee ready for you. Then, let's see, Saturday is your budget meeting. And we have that scheduled for 8 o'clock, I think. And followed by, yes. So I think we're going, if you want to come in early, we'll probably get started at 8. I don't know, I'd have to go back and look, but. Did we? I have to go back and double check all that. I think we'll probably really get started about 8, but get in and have a little something to get started. And then 3 o'clock is the groundbreaking, or the ribbon cutting. Yes, the ribbon cutting of the Recreation Center on Saturday. And then next Monday at 5, we have the groundbreaking for the Public Works Service facility. We'll come back here. That's a typical night that we do dinner. So we'll give ourselves some time. And Patty, if you can make sure the DDA won't be here till 6. I don't think we're going to be ready to run back here and get everything. And so I don't see that meeting, but then you're going to have a work session with the DDA at 6 o'clock next Monday to do their budget. And for purposes for Brennan and Ken, you do have final approval of the DDA board as a state statute. So that's why you hear from them and you listen to their board comment, and then ultimately you do approve it on a separate motion along with your budget ultimately. So that's why we go ahead and set that up separately for them to present their budget. Today, Madam Mayor, would you like to report out on where you are with the municipal judge?
Today, Mr. Adams and I went through about a dozen or so applications, and we narrowed it down to 4 very good candidates that we will be interviewing on the 17th? On the 17th. So I think we have some good candidates in the pool, and we will look forward to that.
So that's your October 17th work session. And then I anticipate that's going to be the night you'll probably also discuss, after you conclude, you may want to discuss who you want to move forward and make the offer to also. So hopefully everybody can show up. October 24th, we have the retail study analysis. Katie Press coming back, doing her final report, looking at that. And then your discussion that night with her is moving forward or not on the target groups that she is going to recommend come out of her retail study and how to proceed on that. And we also have some time scheduled that night if we need budget follow-up from the October 10th meeting. I have not taken the opportunity to schedule the rest of the year, but that's forthcoming soon. We're going to get into our strategic plan, see where we are in some of the action steps. Some of the things you had on your list before, future work session topics got taken off because they're actually in their strategic plan. They're ready to report on. So probably one of the items we're going to do in October or early November is report where we are in the strategic plan and schedule some of those items to get in front of you so we keep on task with that. And then, I mean, look what you're doing in October. I mean, it's long. So that's kind of why you've got a very lengthy October. Tomorrow night you're at the Meet the Leaders. Then the Boots 66 ceremony, some of you go into that. That's at the high school stadium. And so you have plenty of things to do in October. So that's all I have for future work sessions. Anybody have any questions? Okay.
And we will adjourn our work session for this evening. Thank you, everybody, for coming.